plan. It's important, colleagues, that one as well. How do you make sure that when we fund you, you have a sustainability plan? I always said, those that would listen to me in the road shows that I've been doing, was that as an institution, we always want to fund organization that is going to continue to operate. We don't want to fund you today and tomorrow you are not operating. Proof of bank signatories. Okay, just sorry, colleagues. It's not, what is not visible? We do have technical challenges.
Okay, just check if it's fine. Can they see it when it's not there?
But I don't know, when I ask, no one responds. Colleagues, can you see this presentation on the screen?
We can see it now.
Ah, hey, sorry, colleagues, I don't know. My technical advisor here let me down. We also have that in MTTA as well, where technical people, they let you down. So it's not only new organizations. All along, I thought you were seeing this, but colleagues, not a problem. I think you'll be able to get this. There's nothing secret about it at all. Okay, then colleagues, it's just then the CIPC registration, then the other issues, copies of CVs of management, organogram, and program schedule. We'll go through it, colleagues. We'll go through it. Just the items that we do fund, colleagues, is for broadcast. I did say that the content, we find the stipends, because sometimes organizations, they create their own content. Therefore, we pay stipends to the creator of the content. We pay salaries, we pay telecommunications, which is your cell phone, your internet, local travel, because our understanding is that for you to get content, you have to travel and get the content. Administration, colleagues, standard bank charges, audit fees, because at the end of the year, you have to audit the rentals, maintenance, insurance, stationery. Transmission and signal distribution, we pay for that as well, the relief. We also pay for capital like your broadcast studios, your computer, your laptop, OB devices, generators, printer. Training and capacity building is done in a different way, which maybe let me not get to it now. And then also for publishers, colleagues, similar. Operational cost, stationery, bank charges, audit fees, capital expenditure, your computer, your laptop, your printers, your camera, your furniture, and then printing and distribution, which is the core of publishing. We pay. And then content as well, equally like the salaries, stipends, transportation, etc. Okay, colleagues, exclusion, because we do have exclusions from the funding or support. So one of the exclusion, colleagues, is media projects owned or controlled by government. So if you're a government institution, we don't fund you. If you have a special event licenses, once-off publication, we don't fund you. Any advocacy, except if it promotes media development and diversity. Media projects owned or controlled by any political party. Conferences, seminars, media earmarked for foreign audience, etc. I mean, media aimed at responsive boosting or promoting any particular entity or organization that suits only the end of that entity or organization. And then the last one, colleagues, is also unlicensed broadcast projects. So if you're unlicensed broadcast project, unfortunately for now, we do not provide support. Okay, so compliance, colleagues. I think let's deal with the issue of compliance. We're going to deal now with compliance. What needs to happen? What do we look at? How do we assess? Because I think everyone is interested in terms of what becomes our processes. I will touch on our processes, colleagues. I think it will be informative. It might not be detailed. It will just give you an information in terms of what to. So, colleagues, this is just a value chain. Just to say there's a project approval. Once you approve, there's a contract of 12 months. Then there's a disbursement. Then you have to report to us quarterly. Then we close the project. And in between that, we've got monitoring and evaluation that go through and check indeed that the funds disbursed are funds intended for what you had found. And then there's, this then will be a pre-assessment. Then, colleagues, I know some of you have been with MDDA for a long time and some of you understand the system, but I just want to alert you that there has been changes so that when you want to get support, understand that there has been some changes to the system. If you remember, a long time ago, there was no cutoff date. People would just send application. We used to ask for 10 policies on application requirement, which was quite excessive. People used to come with policies, and then there was no funding policy in the organization. We had a backlog of about 800 because people were submitting every day. Then when you calculated that, we have a backlog of 800 dating to 10 years back. And then there was, different approaches, colleagues, which I don't know. But now, colleagues, things have changed. Now, we've got the annual call. Once a year, you apply, you get funding, you're funded for 12 months. That's what we have now. All right? We have taken some policies because we felt that they were cumbersome. I mean, if you're applying, colleagues, you must not make it difficult for you to now starting sending so many policies. There are certain policies we do want just to make sure that the institution aligns with our mandate. However, we should also, because we're a developmental institution, we should also be able to assist you in developing some of the policies as well, so that when we leave you in a sustainable format. So we have a grant policy that guides us now in terms of how we operate. Call for signal. So what we do when we do have excess funding, sometimes we do. I think for the past 2 years we do call for a signal distribution, and those that have applied would have received the support from us. And then I think this one is just that board approves all major deviation, etc. Now, colleagues, let's zoom into the application process and its nitty-gritties so that perhaps it assists you. So we receive all applications in 3 forms, colleagues, right? We receive them physically, email, and through portal. I know some have had challenges through the portal, and they were saying that we have not received them and whatever. When that happens, colleagues, which we're trying to prevent, please just get the email and just send it via email. Because we are not saying these systems are perfect. Sometimes they have their own glitches. And however, we try to make sure that we do not have those. So we receive in those 3 forms. So no one is deprived. If you want to send it physically, we accept. Email, we accept it. Through portal, we accept it. Right? Now, we start, colleagues, with a compliance check through our system. Now, if, for example, we asked you to submit 10 documents, I'm making an example. We check if you have submitted 10 documents. I think that's the first level. So if you have submitted 6, we already have a problem, colleagues, because we've asked for 10 and you haven't. Now, once you have submitted 10, first let me tell you, if you've submitted, let's say 7 or 8, and we sometimes assume that there was a technical problem, we contact you and say, listen, you wanted 10 documents, you've submitted 7. You've got 2 days to submit the 10 so that we can take you to the next step. So some of you colleagues would have got those calls and those emails, and then you would submit. Then once we have 10 colleagues, we go to the second level, colleagues, which when we further refine the application by making sense of the documents. Now, I need to the first time we looked at 10 and we just took 10. The second, now we go through deep into those documents. Now, colleagues, do you comply? Because this is what we look at. I know I have had so many calls about this one, and I'm going to explain it. I think it's an opportunity. Do you comply with ICASA if you are a broadcaster? Do you comply if you are an NPO? Do you comply with DSD, with CIPC, SARS? Now, colleagues, there was an uproar about this one lately because It's one of the criterion that we have inserted in the last call. Now, I want to explain that. I know some colleagues that called the CEO and they were saying, no, CEO, it must be this new guy that is bringing these things now. No, colleagues, it's not me. It's the law. I don't know, I don't know what, but it's the law. When you are an NPO, colleagues, your first point of registration is what is called the institution registration. You go to Dsd or CIPC. It's as simple as that. You go there, you register. When you go to Dsd, you say, I want to be an NPO that is a community radio station. When equally CIPC, right? Now, there's an obligation when you register with those institutions. They then say, okay, you want to be a radio station, right? Okay, we'll allow you, we'll give you a license. They give you what is called an NPO certificate or MOI, whatever the CIPC would give you. And then they will say, every year, please submit to us to confirm indeed that what you had said when you were registering is indeed correct. Now, if you said you're a community radio station, for example, and then you are selling cars, when you go to DSD and they see that you are selling cars, they will deregister you from the system because they approve you on your constitution, colleagues. So it's important then that when you register as your first entry, you need to go back to those institutions and comply. Because if you don't register social development, colleagues, you're not compliant. It's as simple as that. You have not consistent with the material provisions of your constitution. Because it's clear, colleagues, that you must you've got a constitution and you must submit on an L1 basis. So some colleagues that have applied had not compliant with social development, and we had sent them email to say that because we gave them an opportunity, said, colleagues, can you just go and make sure that you sort your matters out. And we do this, colleagues, because there's been some criticism that as government we do not work in coherence. We don't work together. We fund here, other people are not complying, and that's what we're trying to enforce, to say that we work together as government institutions, to say that if you register, you must submit your annual report. It's as simple as that, colleagues. And colleagues, and we just can't escape that. It's the law. You can't call anyone to bypass that. What you need to do is to comply. Hence, I had said in my beginning the lessons is that sometimes we do things that we do not like. Okay. Equally with ICASA. The broadcasters know that ICASA, it's got its own regulations as well. So if you are a community radio station, colleagues, you have 3 regulators. 3. The regulators would be your DST or CIPC. If you're NPC or NPO, it will be, that's a first regulator, right? And then when you're in the system, you'll go to ICASA and register to be a broadcaster. That's a second regulator. The third one, you'll register for a tax clearance certificate. That's a third regulator. And all those regulators, colleagues, must get their report. It's as simple as that. If to maintain your tax clearance certificate, you have to submit certain report, you must do so. DSD, do so. ICASA, do so. So I think that's where we had the technical glitch, colleagues, where colleagues were unhappy. But it is important, colleagues, and it's something, I know it has happened, it has been happening before, but where we correct, no, we're not correct, colleagues, we can't. So we're trying to, that's why today we'd have social development. We'll take you through more in terms of what it means. But we have not been harsh on this compliance. What we're saying is that when we have seen a gap, we ask you to rectify it. And I think that's how we must assist each other, colleagues, to improve. Those that comply, then we take the file, colleagues. Let's say you meet all these requirements, and then the file is sent, then we make it what is called a compliance file. So we would have looked at all the documents, and then that's one document, which is a compliant file. And then I did say those with queries or few outstanding documents are given few days to determine their final. So if you have 3 documents outstanding, you are given those few days. So once you send them, then you also go to the compliance file. If not, then obviously, colleagues, we can't move you forward. Now, colleagues, let's talk about now a criterion of factors that are considered. I did say, colleagues, it's not cast in stone, it's not exhaustive, but sometimes it's one of the elements that we do utilize that I want you to be aware of. 1, The first one, which is a very important one, colleagues, has the project or the organization ever been written back by MDDA? So written back, colleagues, those maybe are new in the system. Have you ever defaulted MDDA before? If yes, how long ago? What was the default? So if you would have, I'm suspecting if you were, you would have, I don't know, colleagues, is this presentation still visible, colleagues? It's jumping around from here, okay. Okay, if yes, how long ago? What was the issue? Why have you reported? Because colleagues would have given you a grant, and then if you in that grant have not reported, colleagues, then there's a problem. How then do we continue to motivate that to get more money? How do we know that we'll do the same and won't report? So this is a problem, colleagues. But we look at the degree of the right back. Some, for example, would say we are written back because we did not comply with SARS. We look at the merits of that. Some would say no, we have reported, but there was issues, there was a misunderstanding. This is what we have communicated. We look at all the merits. But colleagues, in an instance where you are given money, you've got a contract, you have not complied, colleagues, you are written back. It's difficult for us to put you in the system. Right? The second one, colleagues, we look at is the geographic spread. So of applicants, so if, for example, in print we get 170, broadcast 80. We map them out, colleagues, and say, okay, where are these organizations coming from? 20 in Gauteng, 10 in Limpopo, 20 in Eastern Cape, 10 in KZN. And that becomes important, colleagues, because what you don't want to do is just take 50 in Gauteng and just fund projects in Gauteng. There will be a lot of uproar. So we look at and consider the issue of geographic spread. How do we ensure that all projects that have applied are representing the entire geographic space of the country? So that is also an important element. I know people from Gauteng, they always complain that, no, we must be funded. And I say to them, but Gauteng, you find that you've applied 30 or 40, and we're only funding 25, so we can't give to everyone in Gauteng. So please be mindful of that. The also thing we look at, colleagues, when last was the specific project for when were you last funded? Were you funded last year, 2 years ago? Because that makes us determination, colleagues. You can't forever be on the system. Remember, there are others that have not benefited in the system. I think it's important, colleagues, with this cake that it benefits as much as possible organizations. So we look at when last were you funded. It doesn't mean if you're funded 2 years, you won't fund it. You won't be funded. No, that's not what we're saying, but we do look at that. And the availability of budget for the stream. Now, colleagues, remember we've got a budget. We don't just fund in vacuum. We've got a budget, and the budget controls us. For example, the budget is so little that sometimes we find ourselves only funding 9 projects. There isn't money, colleagues, so we are controlled by the budget. So there's no point in us identifying 20 organizations when we know that we only have 9 that we can fund. The good thing about broadcast, from time to time, there has been a little trickle in money, so we are able to increase from 22, 23. But even that, colleagues, I mean, we get 80-something for broadcasting. We can't fund all of them. So the budget does control us. There's a financial management viability assessment. Colleagues, this also, we look at the organization in terms of what financial resources it has. And colleagues, let me give you an example. When we're doing the, the emergency call, we had one organization we wanted to fund. But this organization in the bank account, colleagues, have in excess of about R1 million. And then there was one organization next to it that had 42 rand. Then you ask yourself a question then, colleagues, what do you do? You've got one that is affording, that has R1 million, one's 40,000. You've got the one that has got 440-something rand, that one's also 40,000. So that has to be somewhere, colleagues, plugged in to say that how do we ensure that the money goes to the people that really need it. It might not be correct, because what we then do, we write to those organizations that seemingly have a lot and say, can you explain why you've got so much money? And some of them, they write back and say, listen, these are the debts, what. We look at that. But in the instance, colleagues, where you just have money, but you want us to give you money, it's something that we seriously consider. And then lastly, colleagues, then we look at the actual business plan and the business plan content and its objectives. So we look at the business plan, its content, its objectives, what is it that you are trying to achieve. So that also then, that all those are some of the elements that are then considered, colleagues, before funding is then granted. The funding process, the process would then be subjected, colleagues, to various committees and board subcommittees. So once it has gone through that, it will go to internal people that would critique and make inputs, and then it will go to a board committee. Those that would mostly satisfy the criterion, colleagues, that would be there at that moment, are then subjected to physical assessment. So once it goes to a committee and they are saying, okay, from the 40 that are compliant, having looked at all the criterion, we think that 30 should go through a thorough physical assessment. So that's when then, colleagues, then we go to different sites. I know, again, I was called by someone who was very angry that the colleagues went to physical assessment, but they did not get the money. So the assessment does not guarantee funding, but what it does is that you've made some form of a shortlist, for lack of a better word. And then there's a need for us to go and further assess. But that's not the final outcome. Then, in the assessment, this is what we do, colleagues. We verify. You said you wanted a studio equipment. We verify indeed that you do really need it. We confirm if you have it or you don't have it. Then we also advise the project. So that platform, colleagues, we also, because we're, as I said, developmental institution, we advise you. We say to you, listen, you have applied for this, for a printer, but you don't have a laptop. How are you going to print? And then you would say, no, I forgot the laptop. Because remember, our funding, colleagues, must be impactful. I can't give you a printer and then you can't even print, it's just sitting there. Then we'll say, perhaps let's look at also putting the laptop. Equally so, colleagues, if we see that you have also asked for a studio and the studio is looking very good and fine, we say, no, but why would you apply for a studio? This thing is still new. So we don't think that for now it makes sense for you to ask us for money for studio. So it goes both ways in the assessment. Hence, we're saying we advise you. It's either it reduces what you have asked or it increases. But ultimately, you are the final decider of that application, colleagues. It's not us. We just advise because we understand sometimes that we are, to a certain extent, also specialists. So we will look at and advise accordingly. And where we find that there is a gap, we would advise. But ultimately, you then decide. If you are saying, no, I'm not happy with your advice, let me proceed as it is, then I think you are welcome to do so. Because the board will then be the ultimate arbiter of the process. Then colleagues will have what is called then the Outset outcome report, which I've mentioned, will be used as one of the supporting documents approval. So that report, colleagues, will then be used. It's not the only instrument. It's one of the instruments that will be used. We'll take that. We'll take the financial assessment, as I said. We'll take let's say an M&E report to see if you have been defaulted, whatever the case would be, and we'll put that as one. And that pack, colleagues, would then be sent to various structures, which goes to the subcommittee of the board, and ultimately to the board for final decision making. Then, colleagues, depending then on the outcome of that, then you'll get award or rejection. If the board approves 30, there's 10, we'll send you rejection letters. Now, I also want to come into this rejection. We send to all the colleagues that would have received the award letters. That is standard. Colleagues, we know that sometimes we don't send you all the rejection letters. And it's not because we do not care. It's just the high volume of applicants. For print alone, if we are to take 9, we're only going to give only and then we've got about 170 or so that you have to be rejection. And I know some colleagues want the rejection to specify why were you rejected, what, which I accept. It's developmental, I accept. But sometimes the issue of capacity does not help us. So we wanted to have a hybrid approach. The hybrid approach is that we don't send all letters for rejection, but those that want them, because it's not everyone that wants them. could then say to us, listen, I've been rejected. Could you give me a letter explaining why was I rejected? I think that could be a hybrid, colleagues. Instead of us just sitting and writing 180 letters and saying you are rejected because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It does sometimes, we have not mastered it. I'm not saying we won't be able to do it. We try, colleagues. It's just that sometimes it's not been able to achieve that. So as we continue to improve, colleagues, to make sure that we serve you the best way we know how. Colleagues, this is my last slide. I know some of you still want me to speak, but no, unfortunately, it's my last slide. Okay, so now this is a project implementation. You would have received the letter. Mnandi, you've got a letter. Yeah, the first process will be the contracting process, so that we cement the relationship between two parties. There's a contracting process they take you through and make sure the relationship is cemented. Two parties now have some document in which they both account to. Then there's an official onboarding in a form of grantee orientation. This is where, colleagues, then if you have, which I don't want colleagues to stress, when you have been awarded, you are still confused. This is a platform where we take you through step by step. We say, this is what you can do, this you can't do. If you are in this challenge, this is what you must do. I'm always there, colleagues. Those that have attended, well, in the year or two, I would have been there. And there, I'm very serious. I'm quite casual today. There, I know, colleagues, you very, very serious there. Okay, so but that's on onboarding to take you through, and then so that at least we journey together. We explain when you have to report, what you can't report, what you can do, what you can't do. Then funding is done. Then once we have agreed on the grantee orientation, then we have what is called a tranche-based system. We give you money. Let's say we funding you for 2 million. We give you for tranche 1. 3 months, we want a report to make sure that you comply to the material conditions of the agreement. Remember that the contracting goes together with what is called SOP, which is some program implementation document, which then shows you in terms of how you are supposed to spend your money. So then when you send your first tranche, we look at it. We would send you the money, you report to us, we look at it. Then we would say to you, no, we are not happy. You should not have spent the money. We send it back to you. But what that means is that you are not going to get the next tranche until we have satisfied ourselves that you have spent the money according to what we had agreed to. In the instance where you have failed to do that, colleagues, that's when the right back kicks in. Where we find that we've given you 10 rand, this 10 rand was to buy mics, and then the 10 rand you decided to buy paper. That is a non-compliance. You are not compliant to our contractual agreement, and therefore, colleagues, right there and there, colleagues, we then say, no, we can't continue. And if there was 90 rand left from, you only spent 10, but there was 90, you would unfortunately lose that 90. We'll take that 90, we'll bring it back to the kitty. There are other people, colleagues, that would need that money. So we'll not waste our time, and then the legal processes obviously would unfold then, because we would have used our money incorrectly. So there will be a legal process in one side, but from the project side, we would just immediately take that 90 rand and we will reutilize for other institutions that want the money more. Yeah, then colleagues, when you complete the cycle, then you would have been funded for 12 months. You were spending according to the agreed agreement. Then we close off the project. Something called to close off the project. When you close off the projects, you then would do what is called a closure report, and then would obviously do a financial statement. Now, colleagues, there is something that sometimes, because as an institution as well, there's something called progressive flexibility. There's something called progressive flexibility. What's progressive flexibility is that if we had given you 100 and we had funded you in June last year, 100 rand, and the 100 was to buy laptops. Then when you get the money, you realize that no, man, since between the day I applied and when I received this letter, the 100 rand, the laptops that I wanted, I got them somewhere. Someone Lotto, whoever bought me these laptops, but I don't want to lose the money. You then say to us, no, we write a letter, we'll take you through the deviation to say, look, you want to deviate and say, listen, the 100 rand, you had asked for it, but now you want to make sure that you rather utilize the money for something else. We can't force your colleagues to buy laptops, but you've got them. You've received these laptops and we're giving you money, want you to buy. There's no way. So it's called progressive flexibility. It's subject to approval. You write to us, we engage you, we look at it and all the merits and demerits, and then when we grant you that deviation, it means the 100 rand can be used for something else to plug into within the organization. Yeah, so, and then colleagues, as I said, we also get as a last document, the audited financial statements, and then to close off the file, because we get the audited financial, then we close the file, and we know that indeed we have implemented accordingly. Colleagues, that was the last of my slide. Thank you very much.
If colleagues have any questions, feel free to ask. Any takers? So you, colleagues, can you utilize the chat function or just unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay. First question, the chat function is from Mashile Palani. And the question is, good morning, I'm Mashile Palani from the newspaper. I have applied, sent by email, not child, but I never got acknowledgement. Ramzu?
Okay. No, Mashile, I think I don't even want to sound defensive or maybe say to you that we have submitted. I think it's something that I can check, and the process has not yet been concluded. We can check and see if we can. I'll note it down, and the colleagues will assist in terms of checking whether we have received that application. But apologies for that. We try, colleagues, as part of enhancing our system to ensure that everyone has been acknowledged when they submit. There's nothing as frustrating as submitting and you don't know whether it has gone through or not. So I can then check Mashile and see if the colleagues can respond to you.
Thank you. Okay, Kolisi, you can unmute yourself.
When are you announcing for the project that has received, I mean, that is going to receive the funding?
Kolisi, can you please speak up?
If I understand correct, because you're saying you want to know when we announce the final or people that would have been awarded. Okay, so our process, colleagues, we're looking at finalizing them end of October. The last board meeting, which we're hoping that would look at that, I think is sitting around the 24, 25 October. They would look at it and then they will then finalize. And then We have changed the implementation cycle, colleagues. So if you are then get the letter in October, you'll only start in January, because now we are running it in a calendar year. So yes, end of October, I'm quite hopeful that we would have announced people that have received and those that haven't. Thank you.
We also have another one from Lerato Sukubela. First question is, does the MDA have a sustainability fund? Reason, in case I was funded for equipment and do not qualify in the next window period.
Okay, who's asking that question?
Lerato.
Oh, Lerato, your question is very technical. Yeah, so colleagues, as part of our programs, we also developing what is called a sustainable model. We're doing a sustainable research model, which is a model that is going to assist us in ensuring that the organizations are sustainable. This model, what we are looking at, colleagues, we want to also understand deeply why, if you are an organization in Velcom, why is the municipality in Velcom not assisting you, putting other adverts to you? Why, if you're an organization in a mall, the same shops that are around your mall are not supporting you? Why? Why the provincial government and other different institutions are not supporting you? Because we don't understand, colleagues. I've gone to community radio stations that are in a mall, but these people are just advertising elsewhere. I don't understand how. So this sustainability research model must then help us get some of these answers. How do we ensure that we get and understand? Is it because it's a governance issue? Is it because it's audience research? Is it because they are unhappy with your content? Is it because there's poor quality in your publication? We don't know. We need to know that. And once we get that research, colleagues, then how then do we assist you to make sure that indeed you able to respond to these things? The model then must respond to that. How do you make sure that institutions are sustainable? Because, colleagues, one thing that we cannot do, and I'm going to be honest with all of you, we can't fund you forever. It doesn't happen anywhere. We fund you, we take you from one level to another. You must be able to fly. And if flying is a problem, how do we assist you to make sure that you fly? So the issue of sustainability model, colleagues, is to look at that. We have appointed an organization, and what we want to do now is just to go through those and see how do we assist this organization to make sure that there is some sustainability, colleagues. So you get our funding. For example, if you had no equipment, you buy equipment. But when you have equipment, you must be able to fly, colleagues. Get adverts, get work, so that the organization does not come back to us. Remember, there's a queue, colleagues. You come in, you get. There are other people that are following you as well. But we're trying to avoid a situation where you always come back. So we are on that trajectory to assist and come up with a model to ensure that organizations are sustainable. I hope, Lerato, I try to assist and respond to your question.
Lerato, can we just get a thumbs up if you are happy with the response? There are colleagues who are saying that we are not audible. Okay. Another question from Cliff Graham. Cliff says they received a grant, but there was no on-site evaluation. Why was that?
Grant? I don't know what you are talking about. When you say you've received a grant, but there was no site evaluation, I really don't know what I would have to investigate that. Because if we would conduct assessment for anyone that would have received our grant, and we would evaluate, as I said, and look at what's there, what's not there, as I said, confirm, advise. So if you're saying it was perhaps then grant, it was a few years ago. I've joined the organization, colleagues, last year, so it's been 2 years. Maybe it's something a few years ago, I wouldn't know. But in the past 2 years, I don't see that happening. But you can obviously send us an email through Letabo. We can investigate and come back to you.
Also, Sis Tembi's is also online. Maybe she can assist in responding. Sis T? Sistembi? Okay.
Go to the next one.
Another question from Precious Pilwani. Are campus radio stations considered to be government institutions?
Yeah, no, not at all. There was a huge debate, colleagues, around the issue of campus radio station. And in terms of the market they support, is it only for the campus? Do they support greater community? And I think eventually there has been a position that we do fund. We funded a couple, we did last, and we also continue to do so, provided that the community radio station, the campus radio station, demonstrate that, firstly, in the governance, it's not only lecturers and students, there are also external people that are living. If, for example, you are in a Soshanguve campus, we don't only want lecturers in the governance structure, we want to make sure that people that are residing, maybe a Mruti, maybe a teacher, I'm making an example, colleagues, that are also a part of the governance, so that there is some element of community ownership. But we do fund them. We just have those questions. We just don't want to fund an institution and you find that in that campus it's only teachers and lecturers that are part of the governance structures. We want to make sure that there's some community ownership element.
We've got two questions in relation to the application window, one from Kanya Letabe and another one from Mohau. Mohau is saying, since the applications are now done once annually, he'd like to find out when can those applications be done, the specific time frame for applications, the opening and closing date.
Okay. All right. So colleagues, what we have done now, we have aligned our funding with our calendar year. Because what has been happening before, we were funding before the financial year and it was becoming a problem. So we've aligned them, meaning that our grant cycle now is from January to December. And then the application, how it works, the application should then be around May. It has been 6 weeks. I was trying to convince that we make it shorter, and the sector defeated me and said, no, in fact, 6 weeks is adequate, so it's 6 weeks. So it's 6 weeks, colleagues. It should be around May. For 6 weeks and close around June, July. Then the process, then as I had explained, we go through the process until October. And then between October and December, there's grant orientation, there's contracting, all the processes, so that we are ready from the 1st of January. So you're looking at about around April, May. But I think what we'll do, colleagues, as part of improving our communication as well, is to make sure that maybe a month before, when we have finalized, we must have these things on our website, just to alert to people that we should be just an indicative to say that we want to have the application process in this period, and so that colleagues can start preparing themselves. But I can safely say around April, end of April, May, that's when the call then would go out. Thank you.
All right. There's another question around the audience measurement, and this question is from Simon. How can community broadcasters be assistant on audience measurement?
Okay. So, colleagues, we had started on a process where there is a committee, audience research, where we have also partaking in and to see how we can best assist the community radio station. There is a process. We've been in some committees. The CEO sits in those committees, and where they are looking at best way to ensure that community radio stations are accommodated. I don't want to preempt, colleagues, the discussions and the conclusion of that. Perhaps let's allow it, let's give it some time and see what are the outcomes of that. But we'll rest assured that there is an ongoing communication, there's ongoing sector committee that is taking place to see how best we can assist community radio stations to be part of that process. Thank you.
Okay. So Cliff just clarified that they were funded during the normal funding or cycle period. So I guess a commitment from us would be that we'll then just check to see why this one here.
No, but they're saying, but ICASA community license.
Yeah, so he's just saying, he's clarifying that it would be during the normal funding period. System had asked the question as to whether it was during emergency funding or...
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay. All right, no, Cliff, look, we can check. But if you would really tell us, Cliff, when perhaps this was, what period or what year, then so that we were able to refine our investigation. But it should not be the case. Yeah, all right?
Okay. There's then, I think it's a comment and question from Malvin Ricoto. Until MDDA buy is...
Printing black, plant black community people.
Okay, so I think the comment is that the agency needs to look into assisting with a printing plant for the publishing, for community publishers to ensure sustainability. And then the question is, how can we print from our biggest competitors who are white mainstream?
Okay, look, that is a valid question or statement. In fact, when I joined the organization, we've had an engagement around that. Because I think the sector has raised that before even my time, that we need to come with a model to ensure that we have, cooperatives, in provincial hubs, so that it's owned by communities and the print hubs and whatever. And we've had a discussion around that. And I think there were a couple of questions that we wanted to be clear from our side. Who becomes responsible for that? And the startup, for example, they were saying a startup for that. When someone was giving us figures, was saying we're looking at about, if we are to have something like that, we're looking at about, to set that one up, at 10 million per provincial hub. And the issues of funding, where will we get that? Because I had raised in my presentation, colleagues, that we are struggling with print. So, but it's something that, colleagues, we can engage on. It's just that it has to be outlined, who takes the ownership, the liabilities, who manages it, where do we get the money to start up these provincial print hubs and all that. But we certainly would want to engage on it. We have started engaging on it, just that there were questions that had not been answered. Maybe it's something that from the sector, again, must be then discussed. But as I'm saying, there were just a couple of things that that needed clarity, and how would we ensure that we achieve that objective. But I agree with you as well that I've equally been uncomfortable as well that you've got competitors, and at the same time, you would print with that. But apparently that has been the working model for now, to ensure that your costs are reduced. But we are willing to engage, colleagues. It hasn't been closed yet. It had been discussed. There was just hanging matters that need to be tied up. And I'm willing to open that engagement again, have a proper, fine proposal in terms of how we can implement this. Thanks. Colleagues, there's a question here. Litabo is no more reading questions now, he's just pointing them to me.
No, they can't hear me. So
okay. Apparently I'm the only one on the hot chair. The question says, with COVID, are you more flexible in awarding grants? I'm not sure when you say flexible. Cliff, the flexibility, you would have to at least unpack it. Remember, I did say we've got a funding policy. We are guided by that. And we try by all means to ensure that we satisfy all the provisions in the funding. So our flexibility, you really need to unpack when you say flexibility, what is that you mean? We did have the last year, which perhaps was flexible, then we had what is called COVID relief grant, where people were getting 40 and 20. Perhaps that in your definition would be flexible. We did that. It was in a value of 16 million in 40s and 20,000s. So that one we have done and concluded. This year, unfortunately, we do not have enough resources for us to have the COVID relief fund. So maybe I'm asking you a question at the same time I'm also answering. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay. The next one is saying, apart from getting funding, are we allowed as MDDA partner or being funded to participate in MDD training or seminars? I think this one, Letabo will talk to it. That's his. I don't want to encroach in people's spaces, colleagues. Let me look at the last one. I think that's it, eh?
No, we also have questions in the comment. Okay, the question is from, I think, Pumlani. The question is the MDDA and its funding partners intending on eradicating community print media? I'm asking this because I think the main reason print media is extremely vulnerable to falling apart and closing shop as a result of lack of advertising support, especially from the GCIS and other government departments. The lack of commitment to spend the 30% ad spend, especially print, is obvious indication that government and business sectors have a negative perception about the importance of community media.
Okay. Yeah, I think that one was quite comprehensive. Look, colleagues, I can assure you from the MDDA perspective, we were doing everything to support print. I'm restricted to say what are the current initiatives that we're embarking on. This initiative we're busy with is to increase, trying to increase the print budget, trying to support the print. So absolutely there isn't anything like that. It's contrary that we don't want to support. We are. One of the things that we always raise sharply, that this money for print is just not enough. It's not adequate. And that's why we're making more initiatives to see. Colleagues, should our initiatives be successful, we'll be the first to announce. But we are in a final process now of seeing if we can get more money so that we're able to support print. Colleagues, the issue of the 30%, I did say, I think it's something that we must then again engage on from the sectoral point of view, because I think it's got different views. Others are saying it was signed, others say it was legislated, others are saying perhaps it's something that we must, perhaps MDDA must also look into that as well. Where is it? What had happened? How do we ensure that we reopen that discussion or we finalize it? But I don't want you in any way to think that we are suppressing print. We're absolutely not doing that at all. And I say this because I'm also, part of my response is to head print as well. So I would not suppress print because that's the portfolio, one of my portfolios under me. So I would want to ensure that it enhance. Hence, I'm fighting hard to make sure that the budget that we have allocated this year, we do get some rands and cents, colleagues, which, as I'm saying, I can't say much now, to make sure that we continue supporting print as we have been in the previous years. I think, colleagues, from my side, I don't know, I think I'm done.
Yeah.
Letabo has one question, which he will take, and then I will then, excuse myself.
Okay. Thanks, Pamzu. Colleagues, apologies. We are getting comments that we are not audible. I'm not sure what the challenge is. But if we can just get a thumbs up, just to show that people can hear us. With regards to attending training seminars, we absolutely encourage it. Our seminars are open to everybody. Current projects that we'll be currently funding or projects that we've previously funded, and all other external stakeholders. In fact, the more participants we have and the more partners we have who engage with us with regard to our training and workshops, the better. Also, we'd also appreciate inputs in terms of which areas to cover with regard to our training interventions. Thank you, colleagues. I think we'll end Pramzu's presentation here.
our colleagues from DSD are ready to present as well. I think if there are any other questions based on Pramzu's presentation, colleagues can send us an email. You can either send it to the communications department, or I'll also just post my email address if you have any other further questions for Mr. Kashe. What did I do? I'm not sure if also Mepolina will be joining us as well for this presentation, but Ms. Kina is from the Department of Social Development, and she will be presenting on NPO compliance. Ms. Kina, if you can just unmute yourself and I'll share your presentation. Ms. Kin, are you able to share from your side?
I'm not sure. Let me try.
Okay, I seem to be winning.
Okay.
All right. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes, I can see it from my side.
Okay.
I'm not sure if everybody can.
Okay, yeah, we are getting a thumbs up.
Okay.
Okay, ready when you are, Ma?
Yes, I'm ready. We can proceed. Good morning, colleagues. Nakalina ke Eskina. My name is Eskina Kujwane from the Department of Social Development, National Office in Pretoria. So today we're just gonna share with you a presentation about the NPO Act compliance with you guys. Okay. You can go to the next slide.
Okay.
You can proceed to the next slide. Yes. Okay. On the next slide, it talks about the Dsd Legislative Mandate. The Department of Social Development has a mandate to administer the Npo Act of 97 as amended. And then the Npo Act prescribes the functions of the department with regard to the non-profit organizations. The third point, the Npo Directorate was established to deal with the regulatory matter of all non-profit organizations as stipulated in Chapter 1 of the Npo Act. Mandate of the Chief Directorate NPO program. Section 5 of the NPO Act states that the Directorate is responsible for, point number 1, facilitating the process for developing and implementing policy. Number 2, determining and implementing programs, including programs to support NPOs on their endeavor to register and to ensure that the standard of governance within NPOs is maintained and improved. Third point on Section 5, it states that liaison with other organ of state and interested parties, like we are doing now, liaising with MDDA. The fourth point, facilitate the development and implementation of multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary programs. And then Section 6 states that it will assign DSD to develop model documents that will be your model narrative forms, your model application forms, and your model constitution, and the codes of good practice for NPOs and donors. DSD responsibility towards the NPO. Towards realizing the objectives of the NPO legislation, DSD, amongst other things, is to assign to perform two important roles. those two important roles. The first one is DSD as a regulator of NPOs and as an enabler. As a regulator, DSD implement regulations enacted by the Npo legislation, enforces the law by monitoring NPOs to ensure that they are complying with the regulations. As a regulator, again, it keeps the register of all registered NPOs. And then as an enabler, DSD determines, develop, implement programs that support NPO to register, maintain, and improve standard of governance. And then the second one is an enabler, coordinate, support, and collaborate with other government departments, donors, including others who have interested in dealing with NPOs. Okay, and then now we define this NPO. What is this NPO when we talk about NPO? The Non-Profit Organization Act of 1997 defines an NPO as a trust, a company, or other association of persons. And this NPO is established only for what? For a public purpose, not for individual purpose or for our own purpose, only for the public purpose. And then of which the income and property of which are not distributable to its members or office bearers, except as a reasonable compensation for the service rendered. That an NPO can be established as a non-profit company, a trust, or a voluntarily association, which can then apply for registration under the Npo Act. And then the objectives of the Npo Act, according to the Npo Act, the purpose of the Npo Act is to encourage, support NPOs in a wide range of work they do. And then another objective is to create an environment for NPO to grow and develop. And then set up an administrative framework within which organizations must operate. Encourage NPOs to run effectively with openness, accountability, and to encourage them to improve in this regard. Promote a spirit of cooperation and share responsibility between government, donors, and other people or institutions that are interested in working with this NPO sector. And then we go to the registration process, because maybe some of the colleagues here, their organizations, maybe they are not registered yet. So this is the registration process. Firstly, remember we have said we have these three legal structures of NPOs. We have voluntary association, we have the NPC, non-profit company, we have the trust. But remember, colleagues, trust, we are only registering a charitable trust. Then the organization has to decide which kind of the legal entity best suit for them. A lot depends on what the organization does. Okay, on this figure, it just represents the documents that is needed to be submitted when we register your NPO. And then for a voluntarily association, the documents they submit when they submit for their registration, they submit an NPO application form and their constitution. And then for a non-profit company, they have to first register at CIPC. And then at CIPC, they will give them these documents that they must bring along as they submit their application for NPO. So they will complete the NPO application form, and then those documents from CIPC, they are as follows: is the certificate of incorporation, the notice of incorporation, and the memorandum of incorporations. Those forms, they will receive it once they have registered at CIPC. They will give them those approved documents, and then they take them together with an application form. Okay, colleagues. And then as for a trust, a trust, Leona, it has to first register at Master of High Court, and then go Master of High Court. They will give them the approved this trust, the letter of authority. They take those two documents, complete an NPO application form, and then they submit their documentation for NPO registration at NPO Directorate. Okay. And how to submit for an NPO registration? Organizations are able to register in two ways. Submission by post or physical submission. Fill in the directorate registration form with all the details, like the application will have to complete the name of the organization, the addresses, the contact details are very important, guys, because when we want to contact you, we use the emails and your cell phones for sending SMSs. And then you send one copy of your constitution using the model constitution, or in case if it is a trust, the trust deeds. If in case if it is the NPC, your memorandum of incorporation, and then you can submit them to your nearest DSD office. You can submit them to your nearest DSD office, or you can post them. And then another way of submitting, we have the website, which is www.npo.gov.za. You can submit your applications on our website as well. And then once you have submitted it there, it will automatically send you, we call it an APP number. Is the application reference number. It's a temporary number. It's not yet the NPO number. It's just the number that shows that we have received your application. And then after submitting, that's what you will receive, the APP number. We can proceed to the next slide. And then after you have submitted your documents for registration, this is what they do. There's a section 12 requirements in the Npo Act. This is how they check what you have submitted. Does it the requirement, does it meet the requirements of registration? So these are just the things that they check from your constitution. These are requirements is point A to point O, and then obviously your organization must have a name. And then it must have the objectives. You must know that what is this organization all about? That's how they see it. They check your objectives, they check the name. Are they related? Because you cannot say, for example, this organization is a Skinner daycare. The next thing on your objectives, you're talking about we're gonna go to hospitals and pray for people, we're gonna read Bible. You see, those objectives that are not coordinating with the name itself as a daycare center. So the objectives and the name must go together always. We can go to the next slide. The next slide as well is a continuity of the compulsory requirements. Like if we check on your point L, it's the date of the financial year. Every organization must have the date of the financial year. That's the date that we use to submit our annual reports according to our financial year end. So it's very important to have all these compulsory requirements, because if one of them is not there in your constitution, then it will make your application to fail. And then you'll have to redo it and resubmit it again. Let's go to the next slide. We can go to the next slide now. Yeah. And then this slide name is written classifications of NPO. As I was saying about the objectives, when they check the organization objectives, and then they classify it according to these 11 clusters. Like for example, if it's a daycare center, they will know that it will fall where? Under the social services. But in case of today's workshop, I think ours for now, because it's the media and everything, it will fall under culture and recreation. Ne? So it means all our organizations today fall under cluster number 1, culture and recreation. That's where we will find the media and everything there. Thank you, you can proceed. Okay, we have applied for registration and now we are getting registered. If the organization meets the requirements, then the organization will be registered. Ne? After being registered, a registration certificate will be issued in the name, with the name and the NPO number. Ne? The name will be stated as Kina Daycare. It won't be written as Kina Kutwani as a chairperson. No, it will be written the name of the organization. It will have the NPO number. And then it will also get the certified copy of the organization founding document. Remember, our founding document might be constitution, deeds of trust, or the memorandum of incorporation. Eh? And then the NPO directorate has 2 months within which to register an organization that complies. And then after registration, you'll get all this, the certificate and your founding document will be certified. Ne? And then the NPO certificate, colleagues, it does not expire. Ne? Instead, an NPO must make sure that they submit their annual reports every year after their financial year end, so that in order to maintain its registration status. Registration certificate does not expire. Okay, we can proceed. And then these are some of the benefits for registering as an NPO. Ne? It will improve your credibility and funding opportunities, allow your organization to open a bank account, help your organization with the tax incentives. Once you have registered as an NPO, you go to SARS again, you register for a PBO status, and then your organization will be tax exempt. And then allow your organization to trade and raise funds, provide your organization with opportunities to be recognized because it will be on the register of the regulator body that has been registered with. Remember, I said earlier that DSD is the regulator as well. Okay, let's go to compliance requirements now, colleagues. This is where we get struggled. This is where we fight with organizations because our organizations don't comply. Most of them don't comply. Okay. Firstly, we have obligations after registrations. Ne? Organization must comply with the provision of their own founding documents. Mr. Gashe said that before. You must comply with your own founding document. Ne? By keeping to the objectives of the organization, adhering to procedures and time frames in the Constitution, including regarding convening meetings, ne? Keeping records of all meetings, operating according to its organizational structure and mechanism for its governance, operating according to the stipulated power of the organization. Like for example, if in your constitution, the organization, they've stated which they will have meetings, but now they're not holding meetings. They're deviating from their objectives. You said you're gonna work with children. Now you are working with older people as well in the same organization, but you have not submitted the changes that you have now working with older person as well. So you must always working according to your founding documents. Ne? Those are the obligations. Let's proceed. We continue with our obligations after registration. Keep detailed and proper financial records. Ne? Book of accounts, supporting vouchers, receipts, and then vouchers, colleagues. Ne? You know, if it will take time, in time, those vouchers, they fade, the ink fade away. Ne? So it will be better to make copies of those receipts while the ink is still in the good condition. Ne? So that when you are going to submit your books to your financial, somebody who's assisting you, then you'll know that your receipts are in good condition. Draw financial statements and submit to the accounting officer to prepare a written report stating whether or not the financial statement of the organization are consistent with the with its accounting records. The accounting policies of the organization are appropriate and have been appropriately applied in the preparation of the statements. Furthermore, the report must also indicate if the organization has complied with the provision of the Npo Act. Ne? The Npo Act Section 17 and Section 18 requires that the organizations submit to the Npo Directorate an annual report within 9 months after the end of its financial year. It's a total of 21 months from the beginning of the financial year and to submit the deadline. Ne? Let's continue. And then, duty to provide information. It is the responsibility of the organization to submit the details of the organization if there are any changes in the organization, ne? Whether they have changed committee, whether they have changed the address, whether they have changed just a small thing, a cell phone number. If the cell phone number has changed, it means then you will not get any SMSs that we send through to other organizations. If the email address has changed, then you don't notify us. Then it means you won't be able to get all the information that we might need, or maybe we are inviting you to a seminar or something, then the information will go to the wrong person because organization don't submit their changes when they have. So it is very important that if there's any changes in the organization must submit to the Npo Directorate about their changes. You can go to the next slide. And then submitting these changes, because before we wanted minutes and the whole documents of everything, but now there are forms that have been developed to submit this information if there's any information that have changed. We have a form to change office bearers. We have a form or to change the basic details like the physical address or phone numbers. We have a form to change the name of the organization, and then to another form for amendment of constitution. We have a form to request the reprint of the certificate, and then we have a form for voluntary deregistration. We have a form for non-compliance or with obligations. We have a form, again, we call it Form 80 for non-compliance with the financial provision section. We can proceed. These are the reports that must be submitted to the Npo Directorate annually after the financial year end of each organization. The organization must submit the narrative report The narrative report, it is just a simple form, colleagues. Simplest form. It just it has the basic details of the organization, and then section B, the organization measure or achievements for that year you are reporting for. Section C, it has the list of meetings, and then if there are any changes to the constitution or state. And then the narrative report, you submit it together with the financial report, ne? The financial report together with the accounting officer's report, ne? And then on the financial report, the organization must keep accounting records to the standard of the GAAP, ne? GAAP principles. And then this financial report, it must have income and expenditure statement, assets and liabilities, and a closing balance, ne? Corresponding with the opening balance of the following year. Arrange a written report compiled by an accounting officer, ne? This must be a registered officer. So in those financial report, you will have the accounting officer's report included there, ne? And then please, colleagues, let's check on the accounting officer's report, that letter from the accounting officer's report. Let's check the practice number. The practice number must be written in that letter, ne? And then that letter must be signed by an accounting officer's accounting officer. And then included in those financial reports as well, there's a letter that is written. Sometimes it's written approval by a committee of the organization. That letter must be signed as well by a committee, because if the committee does not approve what an accounting officer has declared in these financial reports, then it means they don't approve what this person has done. So Lerena, on our side, we won't approve this financial reports after they're submitted it to DSD. I hope I'm clear on that one. We check the practice number, and then we check the letter must be signed. Even the committee must approve those financial statements. If it's not signed, then it will make it to fail once it gets to DSD. Okay, we can proceed. Okay, for organizations that were not funded on their reporting period, ne? It does not mean that if this financial reporting period of 2021, our organization did not have funds, it does not mean that it must not submit their reports. Reports are submitted whether you are being funded or whether you are not being funded. So even if you are not funded, you must submit the narrative report, ne? And then you must submit the 12 months bank statement covering the financial year of the organization. And then you submit again that Form 18, that form, non-compliance with the financial provision, Section 18. That form, it will state there, you'll state whether you have a bank account, whether the organization is active, whether you've been funded or not, that form, and then you complete it. Because previously we used affidavit. We used to say organization must go to police station, write an affidavit stating that for that reporting period, they did not have funds. But now we have this form. There's no need to go to the police station anymore. Okay, and then non-compliance. Remember, we've talked about the obligations. So non-compliance is just the opposite of obligations. If we said that you are going to, you're obliged to keep records, and then you don't keep records, then you are non-compliant. If we said you must work according to your funding documents, and then you deviate from your provision of your own constitution, then you are non-compliant. If your obligation stated that you must submit reports to NPO, you do not submit the reports, then you are non-compliant. Ne? And then That's non-compliance. It's just the opposite of the obligations. So there are offenses as well in NPOs. I'm sure we all know, we hear about other cases that we might hear from the medias about NPOs. Yes, NPOs, sometimes we do commit crimes or offenses. So offenses in terms of the Npo Act, Section 29, it is an offense to cause an NPO when it has been wound up or dissolved to transfer its remaining assets otherwise than in the manner contemplated in Section 12. Remember, we said that if an organization dissolves, and then it must pay up its debt, whatever remaining, it must be given to an organization with similar objectives. So whatever remaining, we must not share amongst ourselves. Ne? So it is an offense for a person or body of the organization to represent themselves as being validly registered in terms of this act unless they are so registered, to make use of the registration number, a registration certificate, or any information contained in the registration certificate if they have not been registered in terms of this act, to make material false representations in any documents or a narrative, financial, or other report submitted. We can proceed. And then if we have committed those offenses as an organization, after an offense, there's what? There's penalties. Ne? So penalties under the Npo Act. Furthermore, Section 30 of the Npo Act provides for penalties that emanate from conviction of an offense in terms of the NPO. A person may be liable to a fine, an imprisonment, or both, ne? Fine or imprisonment. On this one, I can make an example of what is happening. You know what is happening now with this case of a life ACDB. Ne? So those are some of the offenses that happened between the organizations. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Current DSD activities in support of the NPO. Continuing with the Npo legislative review exercise to ensure that the Npo Act is ultimately amended to suit the current dynamics. Facilitate non-compliance drive as an endeavor to deal with the high rate of non-compliance. It is known as the Know Your NPO Status campaign. You know? Consultation with NPOs from all sectors to address non-compliance and create awareness of the sector vulnerability in money laundering and terror financing. Continuing with capacity building of NPOs on NPO legislation, governance, and compliance with legislation. Provide support to NPO forums and ensure that they are operating effectively. Okay, this is just a rollout plan for cancellation. Remember, we had, I don't know if colleagues can remember, in 2012, there were organizations that were deregistered, and some of our organizations, we are not even aware that we were deregistered. Ne? So what's gonna happen now? I don't have the exact date or month, but this will happen. There will be a deregistration of organizations that are on the system and they do not comply in terms of submitting their reports. Ne? So this is just the plan of how are they going to do it. There are 4 phases. They're gonna start phase 1 with organizations that has been registered from 1998 to 2012. So if you can check, those numbers are very high, colleagues. see 56,787 never submitted the report since registrations. So you can see we have a lot that we have to do in terms of compliance. Our organizations, they do not comply. And most of we don't even know whether they still exist or not. So we just have to, that is why we have that drive of KYNS, so that we assist them in submitting their reports in time before they can be deregistered. Okay, we can move a little table. In conclusion, it is important for NPOs before registration to do a proper research on the legal form of the organization chooses to operate under and the type of services they wish to render. This will assist in complying with the relevant legislative requirements. Like, for example, if the organization is dealing with older persons and children, you know, you have to abide again by those acts, né? And the municipal bylaws as well. So, and then access to benefits offered by government, legitimize their operation. Né? I think that's where I will end. The next slide is just the contact details that organizations can use if they want to submit their documents to the DSD Directorate. They can use the emails provided on the screen. I'm sure Letabo has mentioned that, as I've seen on the chat, that they will send you guys these presentations. So yeah, you'll get all this information there. Thank you very much. I think this is where I'll end.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, Ma. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I'll open the floor to questions. Okay, Ma, we've got the first question from Lerato. Please explain the difference between an NPO, NGO, and NPC.
An NPO, NGO, and NPC is one and the same thing. They are all registering under the Npo Act. Ne? Just that NPC, you have to first register at CIPC.
Okay, colleagues, any other question? Lebogang, you can unmute yourself. Lebogang Kasipe, your hand is up. Do you have a question? Okay. Colleagues, if there are no further questions, going once, going twice, gone. Okay. Thank you, Ma, for the presentation. Colleague, can I suggest that we take a 15-minute comfort break, and then we'll have Ponzo from SARS and other colleagues from SARS to present on tax compliance, NPO tax benefits and obligations. I think you'd have also seen in Mama Eskina's presentation, there are benefits to registering as an NPO, and some of these benefits are the tax benefits. And so the colleagues from SARS will handle that. Colleagues, can we take a 15-minute comfort break? So if we can come back at 11:30, please. Can I get a thumbs up if we are all in sync? Okay. Sharp, sharp. Okay, I will also share the presentation just now in the chat function. See you at 11:30, colleagues. Thank you.